Some pains don't shout. They don't arrive as a clean memory you can point to and say, "That's it." They arrive as a mood with no obvious source, as a sudden chill towards someone you love, as a hard no rising in your throat when nothing dangerous is happening. They arrive as a life that looks fine from the outside, productive, even impressive, yet feels strangely tight from the inside, like you're living in clothes that don't quite fit. In the old Egyptian imagination, a shadow wasn't only the absence of light. It was a companion, a double, something that followed you into every room. And in that world, Thoth, the scribe, the measurer, the keeper of record, didn't only write history. He kept subtler accounts, unspoken bargains, private vows, the story you swear you're over but your body still believes. When I say Thoth's shadow, I'm naming the place where unfinished pain hides in plain sight, disguised as personality, disguised as preference, disguised as fate. Because an unnamed wound doesn't sit politely in the past. It recruits your present. It borrows your voice and speaks as if it were you. It becomes the reason you can't rest, the reason you can't trust, the reason you keep choosing the same kind of absence in different faces. You can feel it in the mismatch, when the size of your reaction doesn't match the size of the moment. Someone forgets to reply, and your chest drops as if a door slammed. A small critique lands like a verdict. A compliment makes you suspicious. The mind scrambles for an explanation. I'm just busy. I'm just picky. I'm just intense. The shadow loves the word just as a curtain. It keeps you from looking behind the behavior to the rule beneath it. And there's almost always a rule, even if you never spoke it aloud. A rule the nervous system wrote in the language of survival. Don't need, don't ask, don't be seen. Be useful so they keep you. Be perfect so you can't be rejected. Stay small so you don't get hurt. The wound isn't only what happened. The wound is what you concluded afterward, the private law that now governs your life. That's why people can say, honestly, I'm not thinking about it anymore, and still live as if it's happening. The conscious mind can move on. The body can't be convinced by a speech. The body remembers in a different alphabet. Muscle tone, breath depth, gut tension, sleep patterns, the way your eyes scan a room. Psychology calls it implicit memory. Older traditions called it invisible ink. Either way, it sits beneath words and steers you while you swear you're the one driving. Here's where the shadow gets especially clever. It rarely presents itself as pain. It presents itself as protection. It shows up as standards, boundaries, principles. It calls itself discernment. Sometimes it truly is discernment. But sometimes it's fear wearing a crown, because fear learned to survive by sounding wise. You can often feel the difference. Real discernment is quiet. It doesn't need to argue. It doesn't leave a buzzing urgency in your chest. Shadow protection is tense. It's a clenched jaw behind a polite smile. It's the way you rehearse conversations in your head, try to control outcomes that can't be controlled. The shadow whispers, if I can predict it, I can't survive it. The need to predict is not a character flaw. It's a relic from a time when you truly couldn't afford surprise. Somewhere, your system learned that safety was unstable. So, it became a scribe of threats, recording danger, cataloging risks, keeping an eye on the scales. But because it learned under pressure, it keeps weighing everything as if the trial is still happening. Even kindness goes on the scale. Even love must be measured. Even rest must be earned. And so the unnamed wound grows a whole life around itself. It builds habits that look like ambition but feel like running. It builds relationships where you never fully arrive, because arriving would mean being seen. It builds a private economy where you pay for belonging with overfunctioning. Or it builds the opposite, a numb winter where nothing can touch you, because touching might awaken the old ache. Either way, the design shrinks your world, because you can't build a life wide enough to avoid life. This is why patterns repeat with such eerie devotion. The wound doesn't seek suffering for its own sake. It seeks a missing ending. It tries to recreate conditions where it might finally win, finally be chosen, finally be safe, finally be valued without having to earn it. That's why you can be pulled toward the same emotional weather again and again, even while promising yourself you won't. It's unfinished business wearing the costume of choice. The veil that hides the wound is woven from ordinary life. It hides in your type. It hides in your humor. It hides in your work ethic. It hides in how quickly you explain away what hurts you. Sometimes the shadow is not obvious darkness. Sometimes it's the bright smile that keeps a lifetime of grief from being seen. It also hides in identity stories that sound like virtues. I'm a strong one. I'm a responsible one. I don't need much. Those stories can be true and still be armor. The shadow doesn't mind being called strength if it means it can keep ruling from behind the curtain. Not because it's evil, but because it's loyal to an old job. Don't let this happen again. So how do you begin to sense it without turning your life into a detective case? You listen for the places where your freedom narrows. Notice where you can't choose. Notice where your body decides before your mind agrees. Notice the moments you overplease, the moments you vanish, the moments you go sharp. These are not moral failures. They are signatures. They are the handwriting of the hidden scribe. And notice the strange grief that can show up when you try to change. It can feel like betrayal, as if letting go of a pattern is disloyal to the past. That grief is a clue. Many unnamed wounds are tied to love. You learn a rule inside a relationship that mattered. The rule kept you connected then. The shadow keeps the rule because it believes connection still depends on it. This is where the work becomes quietly grand. Not grand in performance, but grand in honesty. You start to suspect your life isn't only events. It's a text, written and rewritten by a hidden hand. You begin to feel the presence of an inner record keeper who has been noting every time you were dismissed, shamed, or left alone, then using those notes to decide what is safe today. The aim is not to accuse yourself. The aim is to see the ink. Because once you can sense the ink, you're no longer fully possessed by the page. You start to recognize the moment the shadow steps forward and says, "Danger," even when it's merely unfamiliar. You hear the ancient echo behind today's irritation. You feel how a small moment can wake a whole era inside you. And in that recognition, something loosens. Not the pain itself, not yet, but the trance that pain is the only truth. So imagine entering the corridor where your shadow has lived for years. You don't march in with torches and speeches. You enter slowly, letting your senses adjust. You realize the wound has been keeping records, writing a version of your story without your consent. Not to punish you, only to protect you. But protection, when it outlives its purpose, becomes a prison with beautiful walls. And once you can feel those walls, once you can sense the rulebook the shadow still enforces, you're ready for the next movement of the myth. Not to relive the original scene, not to crawl back into the fire, but to meet the shadow where it actually lives, in the present tense, in the choices it restricts, in the vows it still believes you need. If you're ready to meet the shadow where it actually lives, inside today's reflexes, today's clenched throat, today's sudden urge to run, then the first temptation you'll notice is the oldest one, the urge to go back, to replay, to dig until you strike the original scene like a buried coin, convinced that if you can just remember it hard enough, it will finally loosen. But the body doesn't hear remember the way the mind does. To the mind, memory can be a story. To the nervous system, memory can be an alarm. This is why so many people try to heal and end up exhausted. They think healing means reliving, and reliving means reopening the wound to prove it was real. They step into the fire because they were told truth is found in heat. They believe if they suffer through it again, it will transform them. Thoth would not ask you to step into the fire, not because he's cold, not because he's avoiding the truth, but because a scribe knows something a warrior sometimes forgets. Accuracy requires steadiness. The hand that records must not be trembling. The eye that measures must not be blinded by smoke. In the old images, Thoth stands near the scales, near the feather, near the heart, present at judgment, yet not swallowed by it. He does not deny what happened. He refuses to become it. That's the difference we're after. Not forgetting, not suppressing, not thinking positive, but learning the art of witnessing. A mirror, not a furnace. A record, not a reenactment. Because there is a hidden trap in reliving pain. The brain and body can treat it as present danger. Your pulse rises. Your muscles tighten. Your breath turns shallow. Your vision narrows. Your mind starts scanning for escape routes, even if you're sitting safely on your couch. And then the part of you that was supposed to be processing is no longer in charge. Survival takes the pen away. When survival takes the pen, the record becomes distorted. Not in a dishonest way. Survival is sincere, but in a narrow way. It records only what helps it survive. It records threat. It records blame. It records the quickest route out. In that state, you can't make meaning, you can only brace. This is why talk about it until you feel it all sometimes makes people worse. It's not that feeling is bad. It's that overwhelming feeling collapses time. It drags you backward so convincingly that the body can't tell the difference between then and now. And if your system believes it's happening again, it will do what it did before. Freeze, fight, fawn, flee. The wound doesn't heal. It rehearses. Thoth's way is subtler. It begins with a question that sounds almost too simple, yet changes everything. Can you stay in a room while you look at the memory? Not the memory's room. This room. The present room. Feel the weight of your body where it's supported. Notice the air temperature on your skin. Let your eyes land on an object that is undeniably here. A cup, a lamp, the edge of a window. Let sound arrive from outside your head. A distant motor, a bird, the hush of an appliance. These aren't distractions. They're anchors. They tell the nervous system, gently but firmly, now is not then. In modern language, this is called orienting. In older language, it's a kind of spell, one that breaks possession. You're not trying to silence the past. You are establishing the throne of the present. Then you approach the shadow like a scribe approaches a difficult testimony. You don't barge in and demand the whole story at once. You take what the system can hold without tipping into the fire. You take a fragment, a sentence, a single image, a single sensation, and you keep one hand on the present while the other touches the past. This is a kind of double awareness, and it matters more than most people realize. Healing without reliving depends on it. It's the difference between drowning and observing water. Now, the scribe's mirror has rules. Not harsh rules, protective ones. The first is that you do not argue with the shadow. If you try to debate it, it will grip tighter. Shadow protection hates being cornered. It will call you weak for feeling. It will call you dramatic for remembering. It will call you foolish for wanting more. Those voices can sound like your own because they learned your tone. Thoth does not debate voices. He records them. He writes, "A part of me says I'm foolish for wanting love." He writes, "A part of me believes rest is unsafe." He writes, "A part of me expects punishment after joy." Notice what happens when you phrase it like that. You're not saying, "I am foolish." You're saying, "A part of me says that small shift is a doorway." It creates distance without denial. It respects the voice without handing it the crown. This is not wordplay. It's nervous system geometry. When you identify with a fear, you become it. When you witness a fear, you can relate to it. And relationship is where change becomes possible. The second rule of the mirror is precision. Shadows thrive in fog. They love big, absolute language. Always, never, everyone, no one, ruined, broken, hopeless. Those words are not lies. They are alarms. When a system is threatened, it speaks in extremes because extremes demand action. A scribe returns to detail. Detail is calming. Detail is true. Instead of "I'm broken," the mirror asks, "Where in my body do I feel tight right now?" Instead of "No one stays," the mirror asks, "What did I expect would happen when the message didn't come?" Instead of "I can't trust," the mirror asks, "What does my chest do when someone gets close?" When you get specific, you reduce the spell. You turn a thundercloud into weather patterns. You make the shadow legible. And here is something quietly profound. You can do this without chasing the original scene. The shadow reveals itself through present reactions. If a certain kind of silence makes you panic, you don't need to force yourself to relive every silence you've ever endured. You can study the panic itself. You can become curious about its timing, its shape, its demand. Curiosity is not casual, it is sacred here. Curiosity is the light that does not burn. So you begin to watch the moment the wave rises. Maybe you notice it when someone says, "We need to talk." Maybe it's when praise arrives and you brace for the price. Maybe it's when you make a small mistake and your mind jumps straight to catastrophe. In the mirror, you don't yank the wave into a tsunami by asking, "Why am I like this?" You ask, "What is this trying to prevent?" And often, if you listen without forcing, the answer appears as a feeling before it becomes a sentence. The body says, "Don't be seen." The body says, "Don't need." The body says, "Don't relax." These aren't philosophies. They're protective commandments carved by experience. Now, the third rule, you take it in small doses. There's an old misconception that bravery means pushing through. But with the nervous system, pushing through can be the fastest way to reinforce the wound. If you flood yourself, the shadow will conclude, "See, looking at this is dangerous." Then we'll tighten the veil even more. Thoth's work is measured. The scribe knows that ink spreads if the page is soaked. So you touch the edge, then you return to the present. You notice a sensation, then you soften your shoulders. You name a belief, then you look around the room again. This back and forth is not avoidance. It's what teaches the system it can approach the truth and remain safe. And safety is not a luxury add-on. Safety is the condition for change. Here's the strange mercy in that. You don't have to prove how much you suffered in order to heal. You don't have to punish yourself with the whole movie again to earn relief. You don't have to re-enter the scene as a helpless character. You can enter as a witness with a lamp. Thoth's mirror is also compassionate in one more way. It respects the intelligence of the shadow. The shadow is not your enemy. It is the part that learned too well. It learned to predict harm. It learned to control exposure. It learned to numb you when feeling was too expensive. Those strategies may be outdated now, but they were not foolish then. When you honor that, something softens. The system stops fighting you because it no longer feels like you're trying to erase it. And as the fight stops, the record becomes clearer. You begin to see how the shadow writes in your daily life. The way you over-explain, hoping clarity will prevent abandonment. The way you delay joy, convinced it will be taken. The way you keep your dreams vague so you can't fail at them. The way you become the caretaker so you won't have to ask for care. Again, we're not trying to fix anything yet. We're learning to see. Seeing is already a kind of freedom, because when you can see the pattern forming, you can pause inside it. You can feel the moment before the old rule takes over. You can catch the second where you're about to disappear, or lash out, or perform. And in that second, you have something you didn't have before. Choice. Not the huge, heroic kind of choice. The small, human kind. The kind that says, "I notice what's happening." The kind that says, "This is the shadow stepping forward." The kind that says, "I'm here. I'm in this room. I'm safe enough to watch." And that is the scribe's mirror. Steady, patient, unflinching, and merciful. It doesn't demand that you bleed to be believed. It doesn't confuse healing with punishment. It doesn't ask you to become the story again. It asks you to become the one who can read it. So the fire stays where it belongs, in the past. And you, in the present, begin to hold the lamp that makes the ink visible. When the ink becomes visible, the next question arrives like a whisper behind your ribs. What exactly is written there? Because the shadow is not only a feeling. It's a law. It's a contract you didn't remember signing, drafted in a moment when your world narrowed to survival and the future had to be negotiated in a hurry. And once a contract exists, you can spend years living by its terms without ever seeing the document. This is where Thoth steps closer, not as a distant symbol, but as a principle inside you, the part that can read the fine print. The scribe doesn't heal by force. He heals by making the hidden agreement visible enough to change. So you bring the lamp from the last corridor into this one. You keep one foot in the present because this is not about being swallowed by the past. It's about meeting the mechanism that keeps the past active. It's about the two keys that open a door most people keep pushing with their shoulder: the key of witness and the key of release. Witness is not passive. Witness is not thinking about it. Witness is the sacred act of naming what has been unnamed, with the steady gaze of someone who no longer needs to be convinced that it mattered. Release is not forgetting. Release is unbinding, undoing the spell that turns yesterday into today, undoing the oath that was made under duress. If you listen closely, you can feel how these two keys belong together. Witness without release can become a museum of pain, beautifully curated, endlessly toured, never exited. Release without witness can become denial, trying to float above the wound while the body keeps dragging the chain. But together, they do something rare. They let you heal without reliving, because they work with the structure of the wound, not just its emotion. The first key is witness, and it begins with a simple move. You stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and you start asking, "What did I promise myself back then?" That promise can be obvious, like a sentence you've heard in your head 1,000 times. Or it could be buried, not as words, but as a posture. Shoulders always slightly raised, breath always slightly held, attention always split between the moment and the next threat. Either way, it's a promise because it's consistent. It's a rule that repeats. You find it by following the pattern to its source, not the historical scene, but the conclusion. The shadow doesn't survive on memories alone. It survives on meaning. It survives on the interpretation you made when you didn't have better options. So you return to something current and specific, the latest place the shadow took the pen. You remember the moment you over-apologized for a small thing, the moment you went numb when someone praised you, the moment you felt rage that scared you with its heat. You don't dive into the backstory. You hold the present moment like a thread and ask it to lead you to the knot. And then you listen for the line beneath the reaction, the line that feels like a law. Sometimes it arrives as a harsh voice. If you relax, you'll be punished. Sometimes it arrives as a quieter certainty. If you ask, you'll be too much. Sometimes it arrives as a cold prediction. If you depend, you'll be disappointed. Sometimes it arrives as an identity. I'm the one who handles everything. I'm the one who doesn't need. I'm the one who doesn't feel. When you hear it, don't rush past it. Let it sit in the air. Let it be witnessed like testimony that has waited years to be spoken in a room that won't mock it. This is where Thoth's presence becomes unmistakable. The scribe writes it down, not to trap it, but to stop it from hiding. Shadows can thrive in thought because thought evaporates. Ink stays, and whether you write it on paper or hold it clearly in your mind, the act is the same. You bring the contract into form. It may feel strange to call it contract, but notice what that word does. It gives your pattern dignity. It implies there was logic, even if it was painful logic. It reminds you that something in you is trying to secure safety, not ruin your life. The shadow is often a devoted guardian with outdated maps. So you let the contract reveal its terms. The terms usually have a condition and a payoff. If I perform, I won't be left. If I stay quiet, I won't be attacked. If I stay vigilant, I won't be surprised. If I stay needed, I'll be valued. The payoff can be love, safety, belonging, control, invisibility, anything that once felt necessary. And then there's the hidden cost, the part the shadow doesn't like to look at. In exchange, I will abandon my own needs. In exchange, I will mistrust joy. In exchange, I will never fully rest. In exchange, I will keep my heart behind glass. Witness means you see both sides of the deal. You don't shame yourself for making it. You don't romanticize it either. You simply see it. There can be grief here, the kind that doesn't scream but changes the shape of your breath. Because when you finally read the contract, you realize how long you've been paying. You realize the ways you've been loyal to a past moment, loyal to an old fear, loyal to a version of yourself who didn't have the resources you have now. That realization is not meant to crush you. It's meant to return authority to you. A contract you can read is a contract you can renegotiate. And this is the moment, if you're listening with enough honesty, when Thoth would ask you to do something almost ceremonial. Speak the contract aloud, not dramatically, but clearly. The shadow loves silence. Silence lets it pretend it isn't there. Sound makes it real. Sound brings it into the world where it can be answered. So you might say, softly, as if you're speaking to a younger you who has been carrying this alone, I have been living by a rule that says I must earn love. Or, I have been living by a rule that says I can't trust closeness. Or, I have been living by a rule that says I must stay vigilant to be safe. If your body tightens when you say it, that's not failure. That's the contract realizing it has been seen. That's the guardian part of you saying, careful. And you can reply, in the same calm tone you'd use with someone scared. I hear you. I'm not here to destroy you. I'm here to update the map. This is still witness. And it's enough to change the air in the room. But now comes the second key, the one most people try to skip or force. Release. Release is not an argument with a contract. Release is not trying to convince yourself it's irrational. Release is a ritual of unbinding, because the contract wasn't made in a courtroom. It was made in an emergency. Emergencies speak in symbols. The slammed door, the raised voice, the long silence, the look that meant danger. The nervous system recorded those symbols, and it obeys them like a spell. So the release has to speak in a language the deeper mind understands. Imagery, sensation, gesture, choice. This is where esotericism becomes practical, not as superstition, but as a recognition. The psyche listens to symbols the way the skin listens to temperature. Imagine the contract as a strip of papyrus inside you. Thoth holds it not as judge, but as reader. The letters are dark, maybe elegant, maybe jagged, but clear. You can see the moment it was written, not with a pen, but with a surge of adrenaline, a swallow of tears, a hardening of the heart. Now, in your mind, you bring that papyrus to a scale. Not a moral scale, but a truth scale. On one side is the contract, heavy with its years of service. On the other side is a feather, light but uncompromising. The feather of Ma'at, the principle of right order, the reality that life is meant to move, not freeze around an old wound. When the contract was made, it was right order for that moment. It helped you survive. But right order changes with time. A child's survival strategy becomes an adult's limitation. The feather is not accusing you. The feather is simply asking, does this still belong? Release begins when you answer, not with your clever mind, but with your deeper sense. Does this contract still belong? If the answer is yes, if you still need it, then the system isn't ready, and forcing release would only make the shadow cling harder. But if the answer is no, if something in you knows you are safe enough now to live by a different law, then you can begin to unbind. In older temples, unbinding was often done with water and fire, with washing and burning, with dissolving and transforming. Not because the ancients loved drama, but because these elements communicate directly to the unconscious. What was fixed can become fluid. What was heavy can become ash. What was trapped can rise as air. You don't have to perform a theatrical rite. The power is in the intention and the clarity. You can do it quietly, almost invisibly, and still speak to the deepest layers of your mind. So you take the contract you named, again, not the whole story, not the fire, just the sentence that governs you, and you imagine it as ink on paper. And then you imagine the ink loosening, not ripping, not tearing, but loosening, as if the letters realize they are not carved in a stone, as if they're only ink, and ink can be changed. There's a particular kind of relief when you feel that in the body. The chest doesn't suddenly become a meadow, but it may soften a fraction. The jaw may unclench. The breath may deepen by 1 honest millimeter. These small shifts are not trivial. They're the system beginning to accept that change is possible without catastrophe. Now, here is the heart of symbolic transmutation. You replace the contract with a living vow, one that keeps the original need but changes the method. The shadow's contract always points to a real need: safety, love, belonging, dignity. It was never wrong to want that. The distortion was believing you could only get it by shrinking, performing, bracing, disappearing. So the new vow does not shame the old need. It honors it. It says, in essence, I still choose safety, but I no longer choose fear as my ruler. A new vow might sound like this: I am allowed to ask and still be loved. Or, I can be seen and remain safe. Or, I can rest without punishment. Or, I can let closeness arrive without scanning for the exit. But don't try to pick the prettiest sentence. Pick the truest one. The one that makes your body react, not with panic, but with a quiet, startled recognition, like someone opening a window in a room you forgot had air. Then you do something that feels almost like magic, because in a way it is. You witness the old contract, and you release it by giving it an ending. The contract was made in a moment that felt endless. That's why it still acts as if it must continue. Release gives it a final page. So you imagine Thoth, the keeper of record, drawing a clean line under the old text, not scribbling it out in anger, not pretending it never existed, simply closing the account. And in that closing, you feel something inside you shift from I must to I can. And that shift, even if it's small today, is the beginning of freedom that doesn't require you to bleed again to earn it. And yet, if we're honest, the mind can sign a new vow in perfect handwriting while the body still flinches at the old sound of footsteps in the hallway. That isn't failure. That is the real frontier. Because the shadow doesn't live only in ideas. It lives in muscle tone, in breath, in the speed of your heartbeat when nothing is happening. It lives in the way your stomach tightens before you even know you're worried. It lives in the way you hold yourself just a little braced, as if the world might suddenly demand proof you deserve to be here. So now the scribe's work turns from parchment to pulse. Thoth, the measurer, becomes exquisitely practical. He doesn't ask, do you understand? He asks, do you feel safe enough to allow this to be true? This is the part most people skip, not because they don't care, but because they were never taught the difference between insight and integration. Insight is lightning. Integration is weather. It's what happens when a nervous system, slow, ancient, loyal, updates its maps. Your nervous system is not impressed by speeches. It is impressed by evidence. It decides what is safe based on repetition, on sensation, on what happens next. If you name a contract and release it, and then you immediately push yourself into overwhelm, your body concludes, that was dangerous. Never do that again. The shadow tightens the veil. But if you name a contract and release it, and then you remain grounded, breathing, present, connected to the room, your body begins to learn something it has long suspected but never fully believed. Truth can be approached without catastrophe. That's the alchemy, not transforming pain into something pretty, but transforming the relationship between memory and the present moment. Turning the old spell, then is now, into a new one. Then was then, and I am here. Psychology has names for these layers. The memories that live as stories you can tell are explicit. The ones that live as reflex, sensation, and mood are implicit. And the shadow often rides on implicit memory, because implicit memory is faster than language. It moves like instinct. It shapes your life before your mind has even finished a sentence. This is why you can be in a safe relationship and still feel unsafe. Why you can achieve something and still feel like you're about to be exposed. Why you can rest and feel guilty as if you stole time. Your body is responding to a pattern it learned long ago. Closeness leads to pain. Success leads to envy. Rest leads to punishment. Joy leads to loss. And the body doesn't update those beliefs through logic. It updates them through experience that contradicts the old rule. experience delivered in a dose the system can actually digest. There's a concept in trauma psychology that fits here like a key: the window of tolerance. Picture it as the range of intensity where you can stay present. Below the window, you go numb, foggy, disconnected. Above the window, you go into overwhelm, panic, rage, spiraling, shutting down. In the window, you can feel without being flooded. You can remember without being dragged under. You can witness without stepping into the fire. Healing without reliving is, in many ways, the art of staying in that window. Not perfectly, not forever, but enough to teach your system again and again that the present is not a trap. So how do you do that? Not as a checklist, not as a performance, but as an inner skill. You start where the body is honest, sensation. Right now, as you listen to this, you can test it. Don't hunt for pain. Just notice your contact points. Where are you supported? The chair under you, the floor under your feet, the air against your skin. Let your eyes settle on something steady and ordinary. That ordinary steadiness is medicine. It's not glamorous, but it's real. It tells the deeper brain, the older brain, we are here. We're not back there. Then bring in your breath, not as a command, but as a companion. The nervous system is sensitive to exhale. A longer exhale signals no immediate threat. You don't need to force it. You can simply let the out-breath be a fraction slower than the in-breath, as if you're fogging a mirror very gently. If you do it even a few times, something begins to soften. Not because you're calming down, but because you're giving your body a language it trusts. Thoth, in this moment, is not holding a mystical staff. He's holding a metronome. He's measuring the rhythm you return to. Because rhythm is one of the oldest forms of safety. When life was dangerous, predictability meant survival. And a regulated rhythm, breath, heartbeat, movement, tells your system it doesn't have to sprint. This is why a hum can help. Why a low, steady sound can ease a tight chest. It vibrates in the throat and chest, places that often lock when we're afraid. It's not magic, it's physiology. But physiology is where the shadow writes its laws. So physiology is where we meet it. Now remember the vow you formed in the last corridor. The living vow that replaces the old contract. The vow is not meant to float above your body like a pretty banner. It's meant to land. It needs a place to live. So you speak it again, quietly, internally, and you notice what your body does. Does your chest tighten? Does your stomach drop? Do your shoulders rise? Or does something soften, even slightly? Don't judge the reaction. The reaction is information. It's the system telling you how believable this new law feels. If your body resists, it doesn't mean the vow is wrong. It means the nervous system is still loyal to the old contract. It means there's a protector part saying, if we believe this, we might get hurt. You don't fight that protector. You do what a scribe does with a frightened witness. You slow down. You make the room safer. Safety, here, doesn't mean comfort. It means capacity. The ability to stay present with what arises. And capacity grows through small, repeatable experiences of staying. This is where the idea of titration becomes powerful. The way you approach strong material in tiny amounts, like adding drops to water instead of pouring the whole vial. If you touch the edge of the contract and feel activation rise, you don't push deeper. You return to sensation, the floor, the breath, the room. You let the wave crest and pass without becoming a storm. And there's another subtle movement that helps the body learn. Pendulation, the natural rocking between intensity and ease. You notice a tight spot, then you notice a neutral spot. You feel the ache in your chest, then you feel the steadiness in your hands. You touch the shadow, then you touch the present. This back and forth trains the nervous system the way a gentle teacher trains a skittish animal. Not by yanking it forward, but by showing it again and again that returning is possible. Because the greatest fear beneath many wounds is not pain itself. It's permanence. The terror that once you feel it, you'll never come back. So you practice coming back. And each time you come back, the shadow loses a little authority because it can no longer say, if you look, you will drown. You're proving otherwise. Now, there's a mystery here that feels almost mythic when you experience it. The body can release something it never fully remembered in words. People sometimes assume healing requires a complete narrative, every detail, every scene. But the nervous system doesn't operate like a courtroom. It operates like a landscape. If a place has been marked as dangerous, it doesn't matter whether you can recite the history of the danger. Your body will still avoid it. What changes the marking is not a perfect story. It's a new embodied experience of safety in proximity to what was once unsafe. That might look like allowing your shoulders to drop when you say no. It might look like staying in your body when someone is disappointed. It might look like receiving kindness without rushing to repay it. It might look like sitting still for 2 minutes without proving your worth. These are not small things to the nervous system. These are revolutions, because each one contradicts an old law. And the old law, remember, was written in a crisis. It was written quickly, with limited options. The shadow had one job: keep you alive, keep you connected, keep you from being destroyed. It used whatever tools worked. Now you are offering it new tools. This is where the spiritual and the psychological stop being enemies and start being two hands of the same body. Spiritual philosophy says, you are not your wound. You are the awareness that can hold it. Psychology says, yes, and awareness needs a regulated nervous system to stay available. Esotericism says, symbols change the unconscious. Neuroscience says, yes, and symbols work because the brain is built to learn through pattern, image, sensation, rhythm. So you keep working in the language the body understands. You orient to the room when you feel the old contraction. You lengthen your exhale when the shadow says danger. You soften your gaze, letting your eyes take in a wider field, because tunnel vision is the body's way of preparing for threat. You let movement return, small, gentle movement, because freeze is not a moral problem. It's a biological state. You remind your system that it is allowed to move again. And as you do this, something begins to change about memory itself. Not the facts, necessarily, but the charge. The electricity that makes it feel present. The memory becomes more like a chapter than a trap. This is the moment Thoth's grandeur becomes intimate. The great scribe of gods becomes the quiet intelligence inside you that can tell the difference between signal and echo. He helps you recognize, this fear belongs to a different time. This shame is not mine to carry anymore. This urge to disappear is an old reflex, not a prophecy. And when you can tell the difference, you can act differently without forcing yourself. You can choose a new response because your body is no longer screaming that choice will kill you. That's the deeper meaning of healing without reliving. It doesn't mean you never feel pain again. It means you stop being dragged into the same burning scene as the price of understanding. You become someone who can hold the lamp steady, feel what is true, and remain here. And in that steadiness, the vow begins to take root, not as a thought you repeat, but as a posture your body slowly believes. At some point, the shadow notices you're no longer obeying it automatically. Not because you've defeated it in a dramatic inner battle, but because you've begun to hesitate at the old crossroads. You pause where you used to sprint. You breathe where you used to brace. And that pause, small, ordinary, almost invisible to anyone else, is the first crack in a private empire. This is where healing becomes real, not in the mind's theater, but in the world that actually touches you. The shadow is not impressed by insights. It's impressed by consequences. It watches what happens when you choose differently. It listens for danger after your new vow. It scans the horizon for the old punishment. It is loyal, and it is wary, and it has every reason to be. It remembers the cost of being wrong. So integration isn't a victory lap. It's an apprenticeship. It's learning how to live in a way that proves, again and again, through lived evidence, that the contract has changed and the sky didn't fall. The old myth was written when you were smaller. It casts you in a role with limited lines. The one who endures, the one who performs, the one who stays silent, the one who never needs. You didn't choose that myth. It chose you because it kept you alive, or it kept you connected, or it kept you from being erased. Now you're writing the sequel, and sequels threaten old gods. The shadow will test you where it has always held power: in closeness, in failure, in uncertainty, in rest, in joy. So don't be surprised when an old trigger returns like a messenger in a familiar cloak. A tone of voice, a delayed reply, a look that wakes a feeling you can't name. Suddenly your body is at the gate again, heart racing, jaw tight, mind reaching for old weapons. The shadow isn't trying to ruin you. It's asking, are we really safe now? This is where you answer, not with argument, but with embodiment. You orient. You name it simply. This is an old alarm. You let your exhale lengthen. You feel your feet. You allow your eyes to take in the room. You place one hand somewhere steady, your chest, your belly, your thigh, like you're placing a seal on a document, not to force calm, but to signal presence. Then, gently, you choose one small action that aligns with the vow instead of the contract. If the contract says disappear, the vow might be stay. So you remain in the conversation for one more breath. You don't vanish into politeness. You don't abandon yourself to avoid discomfort. If the contract says over-explain, the vow might be trust. So you speak one clean sentence and let it stand. You don't add 10 paragraphs to earn safety. If the contract says fix everything, the vow might be share the weight. So you ask for help, small enough that your system can learn asking isn't a crime. These moments are the holy ground. They're where the story changes. And yes, it can feel terrifying at first because you're not only choosing a new behavior, you're stepping into a new identity. The old identity was painful, but familiar. The shadow hates unfamiliarity because unfamiliarity once meant risk. So it will try to pull you back into what it knows, even if what it knows hurts. Meet that pull with respect. Speak to the protector in you the way Thoth would, precise, steady, kind. I know why you're here. You kept me going, and I'm not firing you. I'm updating your job. There's tenderness in that, because healing is not war against parts of you. It's a reorganization of leadership. The protector can remain, but no longer sits on the throne. It becomes an advisor. You listen when it speaks, but you don't automatically obey. And as you practice, the new myth begins to show itself in quiet ways that are more convincing than any speech. You can feel a wave and not become the ocean. You can make a mistake and not collapse into self-punishment. You can rest without bargaining. You can receive affection and let it land without instantly preparing the receipt. These aren't headline achievements, but they're true wealth. They're proof the contract is loosening in the body, not just on paper. The shadow's most persuasive trick is urgency. It will say, fix this now, prove yourself now, solve the discomfort now. Urgency is how the old system survived. By moving fast, staying ahead, never letting the world catch you unprepared. So one of the deepest integrations is learning to resist false urgency. Safety is allowed to be gradual. A vow is not a switch. It's a rhythm you return to. Think of the old contract as a stone you carried in your pocket for years. You don't drop it and instantly forget its weight. Your hand learned the shape of it. Your muscles built themselves around it. When you set it down, the emptiness can feel like loss before it feels like freedom, and the shadow may rush in to fill that space with frantic motion. So you practice letting the empty space exist. You practice not replacing the old burden with a new one. Let your life become the ritual. In the morning before the day's noise arrives, you take a brief moment to return to the present, feeling the room, the air, the simple fact of your survival. Not as a performance, but as orientation. I am here now. And when you reach a choice point, one of those small thresholds where the old contract tries to reclaim you, you pause. You feel the old inscription on the wall, earn your place. You acknowledge it. Then you touch the new vow like a seal on your heart and step through anyway. This is how the myth changes, through repeated thresholds crossed in a new way. There's also an integration that happens in relationship, and it is both more difficult and more magnificent than anything you can do alone. The shadow is often formed in relationship, and sometimes it finishes dissolving in the presence of another nervous system that is safe enough. You let yourself be known in small, honest pieces. You ask for clarity instead of assuming danger. You set a boundary without apology marathons. You allow someone else to have feelings without believing their feelings are your fault. And you learn something essential. Healing doesn't mean staying in harm with better breathing. It means your new myth includes discernment that is calm, not clenched. It means you can tell the difference between an echo from the past and a warning from the present. With practice, the shadow doesn't vanish, but becomes less theatrical. It stops needing to hijack you at full volume. It learns you will listen without surrendering the wheel. You might still feel fear, but it won't always feel like a prophecy. You might still feel sadness, but it won't always feel like a sentence. The emotions remain because they're human. What changes is the spell that says emotion equals danger. This is the new myth you wear, a life where feeling is not a trap. And now, let the grandeur become simple again. Imagine Thoth standing not in a distant temple, but beside your daily life, at your desk, at your kitchen sink, in the car before you step out, in the moment you almost send the extra paragraph, in the moment you almost say it's fine when it isn't. He is the part of you that remembers. We do not heal by reopening the wound until we collapse. We heal by changing the law the wound wrote. So take one last breath as if it were a signature. Feel the present beneath you like a page. Let your vow be ink that doesn't demand perfection, only honesty. If the shadow returns tomorrow, as shadows sometimes do, let it find you holding a lamp steady enough to read. When you close this video, don't rush to analyze. Give your nervous system something it trusts. A few seconds of stillness, a longer exhale. Notice one sensation that feels even slightly softer than it did before. Your jaw, your shoulders, your belly, your hands. Stay with that softness long enough for your body to recognize it as real. And if nothing feels softer yet, let that be real too. Healing isn't always a sudden release. Sometimes it's simply realizing you can tell the truth about the heat without stepping back into the fire. You're allowed to heal without reliving the pain. You are allowed to step out of the old scene and still honor what it cost you. You are allowed to become the author of what comes next. Let the room you're in be your anchor. Let your breath be your metronome. Let your life, ordinary, imperfect, unfolding, be the temple where the new myth is practiced. That's enough for today. That's how it begins.